Welcome to Columbus Report. I'm Dana Gagnon, Waycross Community Media Executive Director, and we have in our studio today Ohio Senator Bill Blessing, and we're going to continue a conversation that we started that covers a lot of detail about some of the things happening in the State House in Columbus to make sure you can stay connected. Thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time. Now, I just want to hit a little bit about housing because it's such an issue, and we see it a lot here in Hamilton County, right here in Forest Park and Coleraine. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening at the state level there.
Yes. So we do have some bills there in the housing space. The problem is that I feel like let me back up. I think for anybody that's interested in housing, they should take a look at the Senate Select Committee on Housing issued a report about 6 months ago. We're in November, 7 months ago. It is on the legislature's website, so they can find that with a whole host of recommendations. But briefly, in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, we've had a couple dynamics at play. One, there wasn't a lot of building taking place. We were underbuilding compared to where we were historically. As you can imagine, supply is less than what it would normally be. Prices obviously would go up. That's basically supply and demand. The other issue is my concerns with sort of the financialization of housing, through monopolizing housing, just buying up as many single-family homes as possible, turning them into permanent rentals, and then since you occupy sort of a mini monopoly in that market, you can also then jack up the rent. But also the issue of artificial intelligence and the idea of AI algorithms being used to price fix, which I also have legislation in that space to fix. But broadly speaking, there is a piece of legislation that tries to fix the supply side of this, and I'm going to butcher this. I'm pretty sure it's House Bill 499. It was another member was saying it was House Bill 449. I'm like, I don't think that's right. I think it's 499.
Okay, we'll look that up.
But it's Representatives Donnie Isaacson here in Cincinnati and Representative Tommy Hall in Butler County. And basically what it is a fund that's set up by the state. And that fund gives money out to local governments that do pro-housing policies, whether it's permitting reform, zoning reform. There's a whole host of, or whole list of items that if they do that, they can get money and then use it for that purpose, which that is broadly supported. What isn't supported, and I disagree with my colleagues who think, well, we don't like that, is it uses the non-business credit, reform for the non-business credit to underwrite that fund. And what the non-business credit is everybody in Ohio that owns a 1, 2, or 3 unit single family home gets this non-business credit, which is a 10% rebate on your property taxes. So whatever your property taxes are, you get a 10% break from the state for that, just by sheer ownership of the property. This is not in effect for commercial real estate. So apartments, quads, anything in between do not get this, and they haven't gotten this for, I think, almost 20 years. The problem is this is really expensive to the state. Moreover, it's the non-business credit. Yet, here in Cincinnati, Vinebrook and its 2,000 to 3,000 home portfolio, they get an enormous amount of money from the state for something that's called the non-business credit. And then anybody that would like to tell me that Vinebrook is not a business, I have a bridge to sell them.
They qualified because of we want to help housing, and so we want more housing to go up, so they qualified for that.
So they get 10% off.
But they are a business.
They are a business.
Okay.
So the idea would be with that bill to move away from that and use the savings to then add more supply, which is exactly what we need right now. And I think it also helps to fight sort of the monopolization efforts of the Vinebrooks of the world. So I think of it as a major policy, but obviously investors view it as our ox is being gored, so therefore we don't like it, and it has been held up for that reason. But again, at some point, the state is going to have to do something with respect to housing supply, because the Chamber of Commerce has pointed out that, look, we're 250,000 units short in this state.
And actually, Chamber of Commerce, that makes it a good point. If we feel like this is, it's a residential problem, it's not a business problem, companies need their workers to live near them. And if there's not housing, then there's no one can live there for them to hire.
Correct.
So it affects all aspects of what we're seeing going on in the economy. And we're talking about how does this relate to monopoly, but we have all heard the stories now that if you're trying to buy a house, good luck, because before it's even listed, a company has been able to go in, make an offer, and buy it cash,
Right.
and add it to their cache of permanent rentals. And if they own all of the rentals, then it's not a supply and demand pricing. We learned our antitrust stuff in school, right? If they own
That's right.
all of the supply, then they can decide
The
how
price.
much it is. And that I see it trickle to local meetings because people talk about needing affordable housing, and that used to mean talking about people who just were unable to work at all or things like that, which is still an important issue. But it's kind of not even the whole issue at this point, because now we're talking about people in careers, people in the care industry, people in careers that companies are trying to hire, and they cannot find affordable rental or houses to purchase that are within their actual career salary. We're not talking about, it's a whole different kind of problem we're having.
That's exactly right, and I think the business community, I think, is starting to come around to, at least from their perspective, the amount of damage that these monopolies cause. So to give you an idea of like what happens here with, let's use the monopoly pricing issue. That let's say you have an entity that owns 80%, 90% of the housing market, and because of that, there's no competition. So in a perfect world, if it's just a healthier ecosystem of smaller landlords, they have to compete against each other, and by competition, they keep rents in theory low. But if you own all the housing stock and people have to have housing, they can jack up prices pretty much however they want. But the thought is, well, that just means that housing is more expensive, which is true. The problem is that if you're going to, as you pointed out, live and work in that area, any non-real estate business just has to pay people that much more to live and work in the area. So the damage inflicted upon the non-real estate business world is severe, not to mention it's unbelievably unhealthy for our political economy. And it's really one of the major reasons why I introduced Senate Bill 76 at the beginning of the GA. That would be one for viewers to look at, because it seeks to go after those housing monopolies. But an even more insidious aspect of this is that AI rental price fixing issue that I now address in Senate Bill 328, just introduced that last week, based on Senator Klobuchar's legislation. And this deals with, maybe you've read about it in the news, RealPage. And that is a software company that has clients that contract with them to maximize revenue, but they have a database now of north of 16 million units nationwide, rental units. And because of that, and the AI algorithm that scans that and says, this is what you should charge in each area, it basically creates a monopoly. And it's the same as,
So in this
good old
scenario,
price
you
fixing
don't
and
have to
collusion.
have, one person doesn't even have to own them all. As long as they're using this AI service,
That's right.
you don't even, you can get the effect of the monopoly without even having an actual monopoly.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's and my way of thinking, this is a classic hub and spoke conspiracy, which is an antitrust term, but it allows them to continually increase rents as long as they all stick together. Which, if you're contracting with them, you will. You do not contract with a company like that to have your rents go down and your revenue go down because of it. But for those people, and I've had a number of them in Columbus that have said, well, one, they might even be skeptical of the housing problem to begin with, but they might also say, well, we can build our way through this. And my response would be, And I'll tell you why. Because Seattle has been a case study for this, where RealPage, and I think it was, what was it, somewhere between 60 and 80% of the rental units are through RealPage, or work with RealPage on this. RealPage had suggested to clients, hey, start taking units offline. And the idea by that, in doing something like that, is
Creating
to
their own scarcity.
correct.
Yes.
So what happens then is that for every unit that you build, which remember, it takes time to build
Right.
any number of units. You can't just miraculously make an apartment appear. So it takes time for those to go online, but for any supply that's added, they can start taking it offline to slowly absorb that, ensure that there is no way that rents will ever come down to a healthy multiple of what people's incomes are. And frankly, I applaud the Department of Justice for going after them. So they are, obviously going after RealPage, suing them. 8 other states have joined in on that. And some of these states are red states. So Tennessee and North Carolina, their AGs have sued.
Like you said, the businesses won't be able to hire, and a business is going to move out of a town if it's in a place that it can't have anybody
Correct.
living in. They're going to move to where their employees can get affordable housing.
That's right.
That's
So-
not going to work out well for anyone in the end.
No, and that's why, having a lower cost of living would be very helpful. But again, we like to say in Ohio, particularly my party, that we're free markets, pro-business, but I hope that none of them are pro-price fixing, because defending, RealPage is definitely being pro-price fixing, and we need to address that issue. And I'm hoping that Senate Bill 328 does get through. I don't have any, disillusion here that it's going to be done in lame duck, but next GA that needs to be teed up to go after these guys.
I only can relate that to anyone ever selling something on Amazon or something. Amazon has a system, or some sellers will do that. They'll whatever product, they all compare each other's prices, and you see them start going up. If it's an unusual, an out-of-print book or something, you'll see it start to creep up or only match or go 1 penny below the other one, whatever max
But
is.
that is a key distinction that we might have to get into
Okay.
at some other point. But Senate Bill 328 and the issue with RealPage in particular in
Okay.
their database is the difference between public data and non-public
Okay.
data. It goes after algorithms that use non-public data here,
Okay.
which allows, there can be no price comparison if it's all,
Okay.
not all, but
Right.
mostly non-public data. And that, I think, is the bigger issue with this. Because obviously,
Good.
if it's
I'm
public.
glad to bring it up, because otherwise people would say, well, isn't that what Amazon already does? or
Well, so I
something.
mean, if there's
Yeah.
public data that it's scraping, that's
Yeah.
a little bit of a different story, because then, if you're a landlord and you see, all these prices,
You see
I
Fred
can, I
across
can,
the
I
street
can, I
marked
can,
down.
I can compete with them, and I
Yeah.
can drop it. So the fact that it's public allows it to,
Okay,
it can be defeated. But if it's
Okay.
non-public,
right.
then it's a different ballgame, and to my opinion, I would be deeply amused to see how people describe this as somehow not price fixing or
I
not
think it's important to mention
collusion.
that distinction, because that will be something that someone says, well, isn't this the same as? And it's not.
That's
It's not
correct.
the same, because you're just keeping this information privately internal and just making your own decision on what the price is going to be. It's not the same as competition.
That's right.
Okay, and so one more topic I
Sure.
wanted to get to, because we're covering so much here. But we didn't talk about property taxes, and I meant to ask you about what's going on with that.
So we are wrapping up the Property Tax Review and Reform Committee, of which I co-chair. We'll issue a report. Broadly speaking, that's just, I think, going to be a number of recommendations that were mentioned in committee that members support. There's got to be some sort of compromise here regarding who wants to do what in that space. But I think the biggest takeaway in terms of reform is that Republicans and Democrats both agree there needs to be some reform here. The issue is around a couple things. One, there is a camp of folks that feel this should be done at the local level, and it should be across the board. So in other words, things like the House Bill 187 as introduced, which was the 3-year average, So instead of using true value, which is a constitutional thing, which arguably made the original bill unconstitutional, instead of using, arm's length sales to get what the price would sell or what the home would sell for at the market today, it uses a 3-year average. And since housing prices typically go up over time, looking back 3 years means you're going to be using older and lower data, which then means that valuations would be lower and by extension property taxes. But the problem with proposals like that is that they grab the money from somewhere. And the somewhere is not the state. The somewhere is, broadly speaking, schools, because schools make up, of your property taxes, 60 to 70% typically go to the school districts. So that's problem one. Problem two is, since it's across the board, you're going to have very, very wealthy people and investors. Again, Vinebrook would be a big beneficiary of this. Yes, it might be the same rate, but in terms of real dollars, they're going to get the vast majority of those real dollars. And that's a problem because it's not targeted directly to your, senior citizen on a fixed income that's worried about losing their home. It's not going to help as much somebody that's, lower middle income that's struggling with property taxes. In other words, you're basically giving those people $1, but also spending $2 or $3 on people and entities who arguably don't need the reform as much. So then it's very expensive in that regard. And since it's across the board, I think it's also inflationary because it acts kind of like an interest rate cut, which is typically bullish for housing. But being bullish for housing means that we would then be spending local dollars to ultimately make housing more unaffordable, which means valuations go up faster, property taxes, by extension, go up faster. So we'd be spending a lot of money to make the problem worse. So that's, and I admittedly am not in that camp, as you can tell from my issue with it.
From the description, okay.
Right. So they would want to use local dollars and have it across the board. The other camp is, okay, let's target this, but because of that, it's going to be means tested. So in other words, if you have $1 million home and you're making, $250,000 in retirement, arguably you do not need property tax cuts the same way that somebody that's on a fixed income of 40 grand a year that's in a $200,000 house, they need the reform more, so they should get a larger amount than the wealthy. So there would be a declining scaling curve with that. That's part one. Part two is that it would be 100% state funded. So this way, schools, local governments are held harmless. And I think that's an important point because, again, if you don't, where is that money going to come from?
Yeah, because if we're talking about, and most people see their property taxes. This comes up a lot here locally and at the county level. Most people see property taxes as one chunk,
Yes.
and we pay it in one payment. So we feel like it all goes to one space, but you're right, it doesn't. And most of it is school district.
Yes.
And then little pieces go to other parts of the pie. We could draw a whole little pie chart. See, charts are everything. But we won't. Next time, let's have a chalkboard though. That would be so fun.
I think we probably should. I think that's a good one.
All right, I'll plan that. Or a whiteboard or something. We need something up there. But if you do something that's straight across the board, it's going to hit the school district the most because that's the big, but also
Correct.
there's parts of that pie that hit local parts of the communities too.
Counties,
Yeah.
cities, townships in particular. Townships are the ones that, they can't do an income tax. They can't do a sales tax. They only have property taxes with the exception of if they happen to have a JED or a JED Z. But broadly speaking, that would hit them quite hard. And the net result would be is they're either going to need some money from the state or they're going to have to throw, as you can imagine, more things on the ballot to make up the difference. So to me, it's kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul at that point. But if you're doing this, at the state level and targeting it, it will be cheaper, it'll be less inflationary, and it most certainly will not negatively impact the schools and local governments. So obviously I'm in
Yeah,
that
so
camp.
there is a specific plan to make that less harmful and not, it's something that's more engineered than that straight across the board that will kind of cut everybody.
Correct, and there's already proposals out there. House Bill 187 was amended to have a modified means-tested, more means-tested, homestead is already means-tested, but more so, homestead exemption in House Bill 187. That's actually almost at the finish line, but there are problems with that I think we probably should address. We also have a property tax circuit breaker in Senate Bill 271 and House Bill 645. And the nice part about this is, other than the expense, which we will have to spend some other time to go through how we pay for all of this, but we can easily make this revenue neutral. But what it does is that those two bills seek to say, hey, once your property taxes rise above a certain percentage of your income, the state starts to take on the role of the additional revenue and basically give you a property tax cut that way. Obviously, within a limit, there's guardrails. You can't have $1 million home. You can't make $1 million a year. But the nice part about it is that it not only helps homeowners, but it also helps renters in the sense that there's a recognition that renters do pay property taxes, albeit indirectly, as that is passed on by the landlords. But I'm a sponsor of Senate Bill 271. Obviously, there's some bias there in favor of my own legislation, but I have Senator Herschel Craig of Columbus as a joint sponsor. He's a Democrat. And then here in Cincinnati, I believe it is Rep. Isaacson and Rep. Hall again, just like the other bill that they had. I'm trying to remember what it was that they had together. Excuse me, backing up briefly to housing.
Yeah.
499 was actually, I got to clarify, Rep. Isaacson and Rep. Matthews, Rep. Adam Matthews from Mason.
Okay.
Tommy Hall is on 645.
Okay.
But they're the same, roughly the same bill. 645 is a little more generous and goes to a little bit of higher incomes. But the nice part about that is it's broadly bipartisan. There's a number of co-sponsors, and even longtime representative, senator, and majority floor leader Bill Seitz is on there as a co-sponsor, and I think it's something that we can get done. But the price tag on it is such that it would have to go through the budget, which I think people understand as long as they know there's going to be some reform. But we are also going to have to end some of the very expensive corporate welfare in Columbus that is, really sort of draining our coffers and our ability to do things like that.
And that would pay. I mean, that would cover a lot.
Easily.
Yeah.
There's a whole slew of reforms that I think that would cover. And for viewers interested, you can go on the Ohio Department of Taxation's website and download the tax expenditure report. Okay. And that lists all of the things that we spend money on. Some of these things people might see and say, I remember that. So the so-called pink tax, the sales tax exemption on feminine products, that is considered a tax expenditure. However, there is a sales tax cap on private jet timeshares, which everybody sees that and they say,
gee, I feel like we all don't get to benefit from that.
Well, I mean, you pay your state sales tax rate,
Yeah.
and it could be on $1 million timeshare.
That's
You
true.
could be paying, $55,000 to almost $60,000 on that, but it caps
That's
it
true.
at, I believe, $800. And so you don't,
Huh.
to me, and they'll say it's well, this is to help, business competition or whatever, but
Stimulate some economy somewhere. Yeah.
I'm not buying it, and an increasing number of members are saying, yeah, we're not buying this either. Not that that's a ton of money. I
And
think
by not buying it, not buying personal jets.
well, sure, and I think they recognize too
Yeah.
that even though that's an expenditure of about $12 million per fiscal year, that's $12 million that could go to some other reform like this, and it's to me quite offensive to say that we're going to have something like that in place, a sales tax cap for private jet timeshares, when we're not doing property tax reform like this.
We talked about property tax reform. We talked about how to be able to keep people in their homes that are on fixed incomes and how that affects that. We also talked about housing and making more housing available, and all of those things need funding. So yeah, I feel like that's, and that gives us a little window into what you're looking at too, when you're looking at the budget, that when you say we're gonna find money, and that's, always kind of a puzzle when you hear that. Like, really, where is Columbus just have that sort of thing lying around? But it's because you're looking at where it's being spent now and where you can say, no, let's pull it and put it over there.
That's right. And I did spend an inordinate amount of time over the past year figuring out those areas where we could pull in money that need reform, that have been around for maybe 40 years, and things have obviously changed greatly from where they were before. So bottom line is the price tag on Senate Bill 271 is $780 million per fiscal year.
Okay.
Now, by my math, tallying up all these reforms that I want to do, we can save almost $2 billion. And the idea would be that we could definitely get that reform and a whole slew of other things, one of which was free school breakfast and lunch universal, which would be huge. DeWine's in favor of that. That's $300 million per fiscal year. But the point is that we can do a lot of reform to free up money to pay for these reforms, and that would be then state funded, revenue neutral, means tested, except for this universal free school breakfast and lunch. That's not means tested, but that's a good public good.
Yeah.
And so I think this is much healthier for our political economy. And I do have something that will be out within the next month and a half to demonstrate, like, this is where we're at. And that, I think, is a good segue into when we get our whiteboard here. We can outline all of this in bullet point form and why these reforms are, why I'm going for them, how much they save or spend, and why I'm doing all these things. You might need a long segment for that.
All right, I'll plan for that. I hope you get your snacks ready to watch that one, because that's definitely the next one we have to record. I'm looking forward to that, because I love that you're willing to come in here, but I also love that we take time to cover details and explain the ins and outs. Sound bites are great. I have a short attention span, I admit it, but it doesn't leave me understanding how any of this works. So this is really helpful for me, and I'm hoping it will be helpful for other viewers that'll get a chance to watch this. And thank you so much for coming in. If folks are saying, okay, I don't want to wait for the next episode, how do I keep an eye on what else is going on and what bills you're working on? Where do they look?
So if they have interest in a particular topic or several topics, you can actually email the various chairs. So let's say that you had an interest in some of the legislation in the Senate Select Committee on Housing, which is sort of morphed into an actual standing committee. You could email the chairwoman's office and say, look, I want to be on the distribution list. So then you would get notified of these bills are being heard at this time, there's going to be a vote, there's going to be all these things. And, even though obviously this is local to Hamilton County and Butler County here, you can obviously I shouldn't say obviously, but you can write testimony if you'd like, send it to the chairwoman. You don't have to actually go to Columbus to voice your concerns. You can have it submitted as written testimony, and then it will appear on the state legislatures, website, as part of the record for the bill. And I think that's a great way for people to voice their opinion on these things. Because again, you could go through Reddit, you could go through Facebook and see a laundry list of complaints on all sorts of things. But when the bill is actually being heard in committee, you may not see a lot of testimony, if at all, for things like this. So I think that's a good one for them to do. But in all cases, the state legislature's website is the first place to turn. And if you're interested in process like, okay, how do I go about doing everything you've just said, email my office, we'll help you with that, and we'll get you squared away.
And actually, I'm going to hit that again too. When you see all those comments on your social media, whatever platform you're on, and you think, how could this person in Columbus have not known that we were also upset about this? Well, I don't know. Did you tell them? Because they're not on your Facebook page, probably. But there is a process in place to make sure that actual concerns that you have, first do research as a place that specializes in helping folks connect to their local government. I'm just going to say, do your research. But then go ahead and send letters and make sure that they have your testimony, even if you can't go up there in person, and send emails to your state senators and to your representatives, really to every level of government, but we're talking about that right now. And you can be an active part of what's going on. And I think it's important because right now, I think a lot of people feel very disconnected to having an influence
Yes.
over their government. And it might feel that way up here, but at your local government, at your county government, and even your state government, you can have a direct impact and a direct connection. So
Absolutely.
just wanted to highlight that again.
Yeah, and there's also a wealth of information on there for like even just a specific bill. If you went and looked up Senate Bill 271 on the legislature's website, you would see obviously the text of the bill, which obviously isn't easy to read for a lot of people, present company included, because you have to reference all these different sections of the revised code. But what the Legislative Service Commission does, which is the state's bill drafting and researching arm, they create a bill analysis, which is sort of a layman's Cliff Notes version of the bill that explains all the points for you, so that you can see the operation of the bill without having to go through, every section and doing Post-it notes like, oh, this is what this section means, why it's referencing it. But it also gives you the fiscal notes on this too, so you can see exactly how much this costs the state, exactly how much this might cost local governments. And sometimes the summary in the fiscal notes is as good or better than the bill analysis. So, and then of course you can see committee activity. You can see, for example, exactly what I wrote for my sponsor testimony for Senate Bill 271 in writing, as well as you can see on the Ohio channel, you can see, oh, that's, him actually testifying. These were the questions in committee. You can watch and view all of it.
Yeah, you can watch the Ohio Channel streams, all the floor activity. So we don't have to worry about gas prices to Columbus and parking because we can watch it at home.
And you can submit your testimony from the comfort of your home as well.
Which, my home is comfortable. I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, that was a very serious note to end on, but I want to thank you so much again for coming in.
My pleasure.
And I would want to thank you also for watching, because that means you are taking some time to stay informed about what's happening in your state government. And we'll see you next time, possibly with a whiteboard.